yet.
Probably they'll join in the maybe next 5 minutes. We'll have some more.
Sure, of course. We'll get started. So, Ashok ji, आप पढ़िए 7 realities.
Lovely. I hope I'm really audible. Jai Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. Existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following 7 realities. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward, when compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Meher Baba ki Jai. Thank you very much. So, we were reading, just 1 second, let me get the Trello piece here. Yeah. So we were reading, arriving at self-knowledge, and we completed God realization, is it? Wait a second.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. No. We stopped reading here, right? So we started God realization, but we did not go beyond first paragraph. We did not finish God realization.
Would it be a good idea to start again from the?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Before that, I'll just spend a minute telling Ashok what to do. So if you go to Trello, just open up violence chapter.
Yes.
Right.
Guys, on the left.
Left. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. So just open it up, and then there is a section called references. You can add an item.
Lovely.
That will get posted to everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. He's found a reference in listen humanity that's relevant. So let's
and I'll be adding as and when as we go, and as and when I get some reference, I'll add.
Yes, that's the whole idea of this. The whole idea of this is we are trying to move away from making this a weekend activity and yet a collaborative activity which all of us gain from. Right. So you do it when you're free, but then everybody gets access to it when they are free. Right. So that's the idea. Anyway, with that, let's go back to reading physical book, page number 141. The chapter is God realization. I start Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. The subtitle is To Realize the Self is to Realize God. To arrive at true self-knowledge is to arrive at God realization. God realization is a unique state of consciousness. It is different from all other states of consciousness because all other states of consciousness are experienced through the medium of the individual mind. Whereas the state of God consciousness is in no way dependent upon the individual mind or any other medium. A medium is necessary for knowing something other than one's own self. For knowing one's own self, no medium is necessary. In fact, the association of consciousness with the mind is definitely a hindrance rather than a help for the attainment of realization. The individual mind is the seat of the ego or the consciousness of being isolated. It creates the limited individuality, which at once feeds on and is fed by the illusions of duality, time, and change. So, in order to know the self as it is, consciousness has to be completely freed from the limitation of the individual mind. In other words, the individual mind has to disappear, but consciousness has to be retained. So I think this is a remarkable definition of ego, description of what ego is. So it's not a definition of ego, but it's a very good definition of what it does. Individual mind is the seat of the ego or the consciousness of being isolated. It creates the limited individuality which at once feeds on and is fed by the illusions of duality, time, and change. Right? So, yeah, yeah.
There is a message from Sanjay.
Uh-huh.
I received one mail also, some triggering.
Yeah. I'll tell you what happened.
Something like that. He must be confused with that.
Yeah, just 1 second. Whoa. Link, please join. Okay, we'll just give it a couple of minutes then. This confusion I have created. So I thought I set it till the end of the year, the calendar, but obviously I extended it when I didn't get the prompt at 7:15, though I was fully aware and ready. I didn't get the prompt, and then I looked at the calendar, and then I saw it's expired. Sorry about that. So
at the we are joining it with what we have. That's right, no?
Yeah, perfect. So I also checked that to make sure that there's no change to the link because you don't know what Outlook and Teams does to the link when you extend it. So I checked that, and then I know already people are waiting on the old link, but I confirmed that old, new, everything is the same.
Okay. Just one point here. I mean, of course, they're just reiterating again the annihilation of the mind. So, I mean, so that's always there throughout. But this is again, in order to know it's the self as it is, consciousness has to be completely freed from the limitation of the individual mind. So they keep on repeating this all throughout.
Correct. The individual mind has to disappear. So I think I keep going back to the analogy I love. Either the scaffolding or the pole vault, right? So you have to gain the altitude using the pole, and then you have to let go of it to make the jump. So in the same way, you need a scaffolding to build the higher parts of the building, but then you have to let go of the scaffolding to actually start occupying and using the building, right? So I think those two are good analogies for the role of the mind in our journey, right? I'll continue. Consciousness and mind intertwined. Throughout the past life history of the soul, its consciousness has grown with the individual mind, and all the workings of consciousness have proceeded against the background of the individual mind. Consciousness has therefore come to be firmly embedded in the individual mind and cannot be extricated from this setting into which it has been woven. The result is that if the mind is still, consciousness also disappears. The intertwining of the individual mind and consciousness is amply illustrated by the tendency to become unconscious when there is any effort to stop mental activity through meditation. Very interesting point being made.
This is very interesting point. There has been a lot of questions in the past. What is consciousness? And we read this chapter a few times. I could never grasp this point until now. I think time has to come for us to grasp these small points, but this is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Consciousness and mind is intertwined. That's why we can't find the difference.
Correct. So when the mind is still, consciousness also disappears. The intertwining of the individual mind and consciousness is amply illustrated by the tendency to become unconscious. So he's using the example of people becoming unconscious when you do deep meditation, right? You just stop the mental activity, then you also become unconscious, right? So this is a very interesting and important point. So I'll continue. There is an illustration. Explanation of sleep. The everyday phenomenon of going to sleep is not essentially different from the lull experienced during meditation, but it is slightly different in its origin. Since the individual mind is continuously confronted by the world of duality, it is involved in ceaseless conflict. And when it is wearied by its unrelieved struggle, it wants to lose its identity as a separate entity and go back to the infinite. It then recedes from the world of its own creation and experiences a lull. And this lull is also invariably accompanied by the cessation of consciousness. This is the everyday phenomenon of going to sleep.
Karthik, if you don't mind, can we go back to the previous paragraph?
Sure.
Previous topic, consciousness and mind intertwined. So the question in my mind is, what is consciousness and what is mind? And as far as I know, the mind has got three parts. And the three parts are thoughts. We get the thoughts in the mind, and the emotions, and the intellectual part of that is, we use emotions for the feelings, and the intellectual part to figure out things and learning and all this stuff. And along with that, mind is the depository of all the sanskaras. And we use subtle mind, gross body to fulfill the desires. So sanskaras shows up as desires. So, and the experiences are also stored in the mental body, past experiences. Those we call it sanskaras. So consciousness is aware of awareness. Can you call it awareness?
Ravi,
no, I think, yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
Consciousness is a state where, and we are like, it's evolving, is what I can think of.
Yeah, we are state of being, right?
A state of being, yes.
state of being. I am Ravi. I am now experiencing this meeting. Is it difficult to differentiate between consciousness and the mind?
Yes.
Any thoughts on
consciousness? Yeah. So basically, we are there is consciousness even beyond duality. So that's what is coming from the, if you read the page 2 and 3 of God's, page 1, 2, and 3 of God Speaks. So it says that, we have different stages of consciousness, where in the subtle sphere, in the mental sphere. So the soul that is conscious, I'm just reading from page 3 of God Speaks. The soul that is conscious of the subtle body is not conscious of the gross body, and not conscious of the mental body, and not conscious of self. Okay. Or let's say the soul that is, let's start from the first line. The soul that is conscious of the gross body is not conscious of subtle body, not conscious of mental body, and not conscious of self. The soul that is conscious of subtle body is not conscious of gross body, not conscious of the mental body, and not conscious of self. The soul that is conscious of the mental body is not conscious of the gross body, not conscious of the subtle body, and not conscious of self. The soul that is conscious of self is not conscious of gross body, not conscious of subtle body, not conscious of mental body. The soul that has experienced the gross world does not have. So world is, so this is basically world, sphere, and body. So I think the consciousness is that of the soul, and that is in a state of transition when we are changing the planes. This is what I can understand. I think this first 2-3 pages is of God Speaks is what I keep referring to, and that has got a lot of answers. It's like, of course, like a puzzle, but a lot of answers in that.
But does it make sense? Answer. I mean, you brought up a very interesting point, Ashok. I understand all these things from the God Speaks, but I'm trying to find the difference between the consciousness and the mind.
So mind is the vehicle of the mental body. So I mean, the mind is the vehicle, or the is a mind is the vehicle of the mental body, and which we have, which we experience. I mean, actually, I have not got the question. Maybe some others can answer. I have not got the question correctly.
I am right. I am Ravi. So what does this I am Ravi means? Am I talking about my body? No, the body is temporary. Am I talking about the name? It's just a nomenclature, the name given to my body. Am I talking about the mind? Mind is constantly changing because the sanskaras are changing. But the I am means that consciousness. That consciousness is constant, right from the drop created in the initial stage until we become one with the God. That is what I'm thinking. See, when you're in 9th grade, let's compare in a simple way. Forget about drop souls and all those things. Let's compare. I'm in the 7th grade, and now I am, old, very old. My body is different compared to 9th grade and now, because every cell in my body changed. My mind is different. I am more aware now. Name is same, but doesn't mean anything. So what else is constant? There's only one thing, consciousness. I am Ravi. At that time, I would say I am Ravi. Even now, I'm say I am Ravi. What is this I am? I think that is the consciousness. It's not the mind. Okay. That is the consciousness. That is I am Ravi. Even when I take up another body in the next lifetime, I'll be saying I am Venkateswar Rao, or I am Peter Stern, whatever it is. Okay. So that I amness is constant until we get the God realization. I amness is the consciousness. I'm thinking, just coming out. What do you guys think?
Ravi, if I can just make it easy for you.
Okay. Ashok, okay, hold on. I think let's try to understand where consciousness came from. So when the first, most original whim happened, we know that it's split into two, infinite consciousness and infinite unconsciousness. Now, what Ravi is talking about the I am. So let's look at the end result. The end result is super consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
What is super consciousness? That sanskaras have become zero. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that super consciousness has always been there latent within the drop soul at the beginning of evolution. So once that who am I came, that created the first sanskaric impression that covered the super consciousness, and it went through what you call as the mineral consciousness, plant consciousness, animal consciousness, and we have come to the human consciousness. This human consciousness is full and complete, but is covered by sanskaras that have been adopted during this evolution stage. So, in the reincarnation state, we are spending these sanskaras, and the gross sanskaras are becoming subtle sanskaras. So, we are going through gross consciousness to subtle consciousness to mental consciousness, and then self consciousness, which is what there are two parts. One is the super consciousness state, nirvana state, where consciousness is, but God is not. So I am God comes in the second state of panaphila. So because the first state is the divine absolute vacuum state. Coming back to the mental body or mind, so mental body is also mind, and mind is the repository of all these sanskaras. So I think they are two different things. So we can say we are going from gross consciousness to subtle consciousness to mental consciousness, depending on which plane you're in. So that's my understanding. Jai Baba.
Good, Kama. Good analogy. I think that's what I also think the same way.
So I have a question. So how do we define consciousness?
It's very difficult. That's why Baba said in this discourses, they are intertwined.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. I understand the intertwined part. But is there a way we can try to verbalize what consciousness is? I'm struggling.
Well, Karthik consciousness is different from Ravi consciousness to Kama consciousness, which is basically the ego consciousness we are talking about. So consciousness has different degrees based on which kingdom you are in, correct? In the human kingdom, it has reached the highest degree of consciousness, which is called full and complete consciousness, where you are already there. I am a human being. But we are human becomes to become God realized because of sanskaras. Technically, we have full and complete consciousness, except that consciousness is contaminated with sanskaras, right? So consciousness changes. It has different degrees depending on which kingdom you're talking about. And once sanskaras become zero, you have super consciousness and you have liberation. Jai Baba.
I get some of that, but still, where do we? Is there? If somebody asks me what's conscious, yeah, go ahead, Ravita. Sorry.
Can you tell me soul and then what are the layers to it? Super soul is God. Then soul is the drop soul like us. Then all this consciousness and all these other things. Where what is where?
See, the soul and super soul are same. Only difference is the soul is hanging on to this mental body and subtle body and all the other paraphernalia. That's why the soul becomes limited. When it leaves all these bodies, then the soul becomes super soul. So the super soul, you are the super soul.
Yeah, that is okay. But this consciousness is what? I still don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, it is intertwined. The consciousness is intertwined with your mind and the ego. Mind is the seat of the ego, so it is intertwined. It's very hard to distinguish what is consciousness and what is mind. We can eliminate. Sometimes you get clarity by eliminating it. Elimination process. You have energy, right? Is consciousness is energy? No, that comes from your subtle body. You have thoughts. Is that consciousness? No, that connected with the mind. You have feelings and you have intellect that you can use. Is that consciousness? No, that comes from the sanskaras, the mental body. So
what goes
take
with
out
us?
all these things, that whatever is left over is the consciousness.
So once you drop the body, what goes along? What gets transferred?
Mental body and subtle
Look,
body.
and see,
two
the
bodies.
look at the analogy you can use is very simple. Look at the oversoul as the ocean. Look at the drop soul as the water drops. That is, the ocean evaporates. We know that due to the sun. So the water gets evaporated, becomes clouds, and it condenses into rainfall. Now, when the raindrop is falling, imagine each raindrop as a drop soul. Each one of us is like that. It is pure consciousness. But as soon as it hits the earth, it gets, mixed with mud, debris, and all that. So look at that analogy of sanskaras. Okay. During that process, when it's falling, it has become separate from the ocean, and it's asking, who am I? Like, no, I'm separated now. So that created that impression. So you have to look at the soul as a water drop, which is pure. But when the water drop get mixed with the mud and whatever, like, so that you can think of sanskaras, and it is going through the filtration process, and its function is to unite with the ocean, because ultimately that is latent in it. So the whole journey is union. That's why belonging for union with God, with Baba, with the self, basically, the oversoul self, which is already inside. But because of this contamination, the virus, the sanskaras are like the coronavirus. You can look at it that way. You have to eliminate that. So it's very difficult to express this, but that is why analogies are used to explain these concepts. See, unless we reach self-realization, we really don't know what is superconsciousness, what is divine love, and so on and so forth. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, thank you.
Can I put a few words in this?
Yes, sentences you can put.
Okay. One single word which can partly and say in a very small way replace consciousness is awareness. So this is also
awareness.
when we think of mind, subtle body, mental body, gross body, and all that, there are a lot of layers around. But through and through, there is something which is always constant. So even if you drop each body, there is one thing which is constant, that is the awareness. So even if you drop your gross body, you are not aware of gross, but you are aware of subtle and mental. When you drop the subtle, you are aware of mental, and you have lost the awareness of the subtle. So when you drop the mental also, you are aware, still aware. There is only awareness. So the two stages of awareness, as Kama explains, is one is that you are able to see God in front of you. And later on, this awareness also merges with God, that is super consciousness merging with the consciousness. So awareness of individual souls merges with the universal awareness. So you can say that God is universal awareness, universal consciousness. So this through and through, this consciousness is the one which drives us through and through, but it is totally separate from all the enclosures or the veils that we have created. And this one of the driving forces is the ego. So we identify this consciousness with ego, but actually it is wrong. So it is beyond ego. It is also a reflection for ego. It is a mirror for ego. So that's why, and ultimately there are philosophies which say that consciousness and God are the same. So there we have to say clearly define what is soul and what is consciousness. There it will be difficult. I don't know. That is my position. So consciousness is, loosely talking, we can call it as awareness. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Thank
Baba.
you.
See,
Yeah, that's a good point. I think. Go ahead, Kama.
When you are conscious of your gross body, when we are attached to our 5 physical sensations of touch, taste, sound, smell, sight, we identify with our gross body. That is a form of gross consciousness. And when you transmute that and go into the subtle world where you're using the subtle planes, then you're subtle conscious. So that is why it says that you are subtle conscious and you're using your subtle body, which means the subtle consciousness is happening. So in each of these different stages, consciousness, it's the same consciousness, except what does it identify with? Does it identify with a gross body? Does it identify with a subtle body? Does it identify with a mental body? So each identification is based on which sphere of existence you are. Are you in the gross sphere of existence, the subtle sphere of existence, or the mental sphere of existence? And once you reach the 7th plane, there is no more identification with the bodies. So the only identification with the universal self, the oversoul. So that becomes self-consciousness. There is a difference between super consciousness and self-consciousness because, as we know, nirvana means divine vacuum state. That is, consciousness which is super consciousness, and God is not. But nirvikalpa samadhi is self-realization or God realization. So we have to be very cognizant of this fact, the difference between God realization, self-realization vis-a-vis the state of super consciousness, which is nirvana. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Good points, Kama. I would like to add one more point. The consciousness is nothing but the God itself. Only thing is, it is unconscious of its infinite existence and infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. That is what the consciousness is trying to reach to its original state. And it is not able to reach because it is in the midst of sanskaras. It is prisoned by the sanskaras. That is why the God state is not able to experience his original state. So the consciousness is God, but only thing is it's unconsciousness. Unconscious part of the God, I can say. Jai Baba.
Yeah, I think that's closer to what Mamaji said now, which is some philosophies talk of consciousness and God being the same. But I personally, I feel awareness is a weaker word than consciousness, especially if you go to, though I agree that awareness is one attribute of being conscious, but I think consciousness may be a little more than just awareness. I don't know. I mean, that's just, and again, if you notice Baba literature, Baba doesn't use awareness. He uses consciousness only.
Yeah.
Right. Predominantly, he does not use awareness. Whereas other philosophers, and especially I think Vedanta in English, uses awareness heavily. Right.
Yes.
And in fact, synonymously with consciousness.
Yes, that explains the fact very clearly. When God speaks, he doesn't want any other, say, smaller word to explain a real concrete concept. Whereas we are people in duality need something to simulate, something to compare and all that. That's why we try to use words which are very common to us. That's why I started
that's the sign of perfection.
Yes. That's why I told in the beginning that to use an alternative loose term is awareness.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Let's wait a little bit and we are all going to get God conscious. Then we'll have a clear understanding of what is consciousness is.
Yes.
Right? Just a little bit of time. We have to be patient. Or we are already, as Kama says, you're already realized. Only thing is we are not, what is that, Kama, you say? We're already realized, but we are not awakened. Right. We are not awakened.
Yeah, we are basically God realized. Let's say if we are like, for example, when we have 8 hours of sound sleep state, it's very clear from God speaks that the Atma connects with the Paramatma but we are unconscious of it. That is why we have one aspect of Satchitananda, which is bliss. That bliss which we experience when we wake up, we have that slight bit of conscious experience of that bliss, but then we get caught up in duality due to samskaras. So technically only 16 hours of the waking state, which is 67% of the time, we have this challenge. But also in the waking state, when we are self-aware, that I feel is like in the being state, when you are living in the present moment, like when you're playing a game or when you're totally concentrated 100%, that is also a form of self-awareness, I feel. The only thing is we have to make it 24/7. That is the challenge, how to make it constant and continuous. Jai Baba.
I think we can continue to read.
Yeah, very interesting conversation, but let's continue. So I'll read the consciousness and mind intertwined paragraph again. Throughout the past life history of the soul, its consciousness has grown with the individual mind, and all the workings of consciousness have proceeded against the background of the individual mind. Consciousness has therefore come to be firmly embedded in the individual mind and cannot be extricated from this setting into which it has been woven. The result is that if the mind is stilled, consciousness also disappears. The intertwining of the individual mind and consciousness is amply illustrated by the tendency to become unconscious when there is any effort to stop mental activity through meditation. Explanation of sleep. The everyday phenomenon of going to sleep is not essentially different from the lull experienced during meditation, but it is slightly different in its origin. Since the individual mind is continuously confronted by the world of duality, it is involved in ceaseless conflict. And when it is wearied by its unrelieved struggle, it wants to lose its identity as a separate entity and go back to the infinite. It then recedes from the world of its own creation and experiences a lull, and this lull is also invariably accompanied by the cessation of consciousness. So consciousness is consciousness ceases, and then, like Kama said, you're in bliss in the time of deep sleep. So, resuming wakefulness. The quiescence of mental activity in sleep entails the complete submerging of consciousness. Now, what does quiescence of mean? Anybody? Let's look it up.
We can say functioning of the mental activity. Yeah, it's at rest.
Yeah, being at rest, quiet. So it's a word related to quiet,
inactivity,
still, inactive, or motionless. So let's go back. So the quiescence of mental activity in sleep entails the complete submerging of consciousness, but this cessation of mental life and conscious functioning is only temporary because the impressions stored in the mind goad it to renewed activity. That is when you wake up. After a while, the stimuli of the impressions resulting in stirring the mind and reviving the conscious functioning that is performed through its medium. So the period of sleep is followed by a period of wakefulness, and the period of wakefulness is followed by a period of sleep, according to the law of alternating activity and rest. As long as the latent impressions in the mind are not completely undone, however, there is no final annihilation of the individual mind or emancipation of consciousness. In sleep, the mind temporarily forgets its identity, but it does not finally lose its individual existence. When the person awakens, he finds himself subject to his old limitations. There is a resurrection of consciousness, but it is still mind ridden. So again, very intertwined consciousness and mind. when you wake up, your samskaras slap you back into old world, and there you go. Obstacle of ego. The limited mind is the soil in which the ego is securely rooted, and this ego perpetuates ignorance through the many illusions in which it is caught. The ego prevents manifestation of infinite knowledge, which is already latent in the soul. It is the most formidable obstacle to the attainment of God. A Persian poem says truly, it is extremely difficult to pierce through the wheel of ignorance, for there is a rock on the fire. Just as a flame cannot rise very high if a rock is placed upon it, a desire to know one's own true nature cannot lead to the truth as long as the burden of the ego is placed on consciousness. Success in finding oneself is rendered impossible by the continuation of the ego, which persists throughout the journey of the soul. In old age, an aching tooth can give untold trouble because it is not easily uprooted, although loose within its socket. In the same way, the ego, which might become feeble through love or penance, is yet difficult to eradicate. It persists till the very end. Though it becomes looser as the soul advances on the path, it remains till the last stage, which is the seventh plane of involution of consciousness. So, any idea? Yeah.
We can discuss a little bit here. Here we are talking about ego here. So mind is the seat of the ego. And ego perpetuates the ignorance. We want to read discourses, and then our mind says, oh, don't take trouble, just enjoy. That is the opposition of the ego. But we have to break that. The ego always makes us to be in Maya. Mind itself is Maya. It always tries to make us be back in Maya. I mean, that's why we have to use extra force to do anything constructive. Because we are used to influence of the mind and the ego. That's why we have been in the past, we have been, trailing. But when we want to do something like spiritual path, taking up a spiritual path or study or attaining something, your mind always pulls. There's always a pullback. That is the effect of the Maya. Yeah, that's what we have to cross. The letharginess, the laziness, tamas, the Krishna talks about in Bhagavad Gita. That is what it makes us pull back. Jai Baba.
But how do we see the spiritual ego? People who have some sort of a false image of their progress in spirituality, that is also because of ego. How do we look at it?
Yeah, that's anything we try to attain the ego. If we don't have check on the ego constantly, whatever we attain, whether it is a spiritual knowledge or anything, the ego also automatically comes up, as long as you don't keep a check on that. That is why Baba sometime ago he said we have to close our ego with both the hands. Even if we close it with both hands, the power of ego is such that it can sneak in through these holes, through these fingers holes. That much is our ego is so cunning. That's why we have to always keep our ego in check while we are. It's a simultaneous work for us while we are achieving this spiritual knowledge, and also keeping the ego at check is a constant battle we have to go through. Jai Baba.
I just wanted to.
I think to Doc Mama, what he's saying is that let's define what is spiritual ego and what is material ego. We know that as a human being, you have two things that we are striving for. One is material freedom and one is spiritual freedom, which is what the Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization tells us. So what is this material ego? You have your professional degree, you have a fantastic personal family life, you reach the peak. You take what I call as the Rajat Gupta syndrome, Rajaratnam, $1.3 billion and Rajat Gupta, $130 million. You have reached the highest material ego. All these people who are running all these unicorn companies, they all have, now they want to go out of space. So let's assume that there is that material ego that, I have achieved all this. So that is one aspect. We all go through that. The spiritual, that is, this is material ego is for people who are stuck in the gross sphere of existence. Now, once you get over that and start in the process of involution, starting from the first plane to the sixth plane, the spiritual ego is latent there. And we know that the fourth plane is the biggest spiritual ego, which is where you misuse your power. So we have seen all the scandals that have happened in the spiritual marketplace. And Baba said that if you are in the fifth and sixth plane, you are in safe territory, because I believe that the fifth and sixth plane saints are much more self-aware about their own progress in the involution space, because you lose the power to do miracles after you reach the fifth and sixth plane, because you only see God. In fifth plane you feel God, but in sixth plane you see God all the time. So the spiritual ego, you could call it between the first and the fourth plane, where you get different siddhis and you start misusing them. And many times Baba has said it very clearly. I think we've read in the stages of the path that Maya will make you feel that you have become self-realized. So that is part of the spiritual ego.
Thank you. By the way, Kama, do you have the physical book with you? I'm sure you do. So can you confirm why we have marked this? Because we have marked this in our last read. And I would have marked it based on your input. The last line in second paragraph, 143.
I think, yeah, it's a good point. Again, though it becomes looser as the soul advances on the path, it remains till the last stage, which is the seventh plane of involution of consciousness. Yeah, I used to struggle with that, but I think what it means is the false ego, the false I self gets dissolved once you go into the seventh plane.
After sixth. Correct.
Yeah, after the sixth, right? Once you go to the seventh plane, what is ego? Ego is because of sanskaras. Sanskaras become zero, means no ego. No ego means no mind, manonash, right? Annihilation of the mind, nirvana, fana. And in the seventh plane, basically the individualized soul, this is given in God Speaks. I don't have the exact sentence. We actually have the real I self, or the real ego, it's called, and it's just a terminology, I would say. I think that is why it says, though it means the ego becomes looser as the soul advances on the path, it remains till the last stage, which is the seventh plane of involution of consciousness. So this real ego is what the Sadgurus and the 56 God realized souls who operate in that, on planet Earth as state 2C. So that is the real ego, which what these people operate with. That's my understanding. Jai Baba.
I think I agree with
So
Kama.
in effect, we can knock off this comment, right? So we agree with this.
No, that's very important, Karthik, because that is the last thing that that will go away. Ego will stay until all the what do you call for singular of datum, right? Datum, right? The last one single thing, datum. With the last sanskara is erased. Until then, the ego exists. And that is the one that is at the threshold of sixth and seventh plane. That is what it is erased, while the sanskaras are all erased. The separateness, feeling separate, I am individual, I am not God, I'm separate from everybody else. That is the ego. That ego is cleared only in the threshold of the sixth plane.
Uh,
I want to,
yeah,
I want to make a clarification here. I think that this is again semantics. So whenever we talk about the ego, it is the false ego, the false I self, which is the ego personality self. So that is something we need to keep in the back of our mind. Whenever we are talking about the ego, it is the false I self, all the false ego, because according to the terminology of God Speaks, Baba is using the word real ego, which happens in the seventh state. Similarly, another thing that I want to also introduce here is when we are talking about everything and nothing, actually in the supplement of God Speaks, I noticed there is a one particular supplement where Baba talks about real everything, real nothing, false everything, and false nothing. And I will just give you my interpretation what it means. Real everything is that, that Paramatma state, and real nothing is the divine absolute vacuum state. False nothing is basically the Om point, because that's where from the nothingness of the nothingness, which is part of the everything, that's where this whole universe manifests, which is the creation and all this phenomenal world of duality of forms, which is called false everything. So this is the technical definition that I kind of observed in the supplement of God Speaks. So the third point I want to make is whenever we read the word soul in any Baba literature or any literature, it is always the consciousness of the soul, because nothing happens to the soul. See, we can't define what the soul is because, like I said, you have to be in the seventh plane. But unfortunately, because of the English language, they don't put the whole phrase consciousness of the soul or the soul's consciousness takes a false identification with the gross body and so on and so forth. So that is another thing that I wanted to mention. Jai Baba.
Cool. I would like to make a statement here. You just hear this and then comment. So the first question, who am I, is the false ego, and I am God is the true ego or the universal ego. In between is the whole story. Jai Baba.
That is true, Mama. Absolutely true. Yeah. Very good.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Yeah. So I just want to say that when we say I am Ravi or I am Ashok, so if we substitute I am with God, so God is Ravi, God is Ashok, because we, as we have already reiterated so many times, that we are all God realized but not aware. So I think the simple way of putting it is that if we or can we substitute I am with God, and I think that might, on a very simple sense, make it a little more clear. And the other thing is that on the stages of the path, the intensity of the sanskaras, the sanskaras become lesser as we go up the path. And I think that is a very relevant chapter to read with what we are discussing.
Yes.
When Baba was asked, how can you say that you are God? They thought the questioner was, I thought he was doing, Baba was doing blasphemy. So Baba said, I am God, you are also God. Whereas I am a human as well as I'm experiencing the God simultaneously. Whereas you are God, you're experiencing as a human, but you are not aware of your godliness. That's what Baba said.
That is exactly what I
wanted
to anyway.
Jai Baba.
Yeah. Let's continue. Difficulty of overcoming ego. Ego is the center of all human activity. The attempts of the ego to secure its own extinction might be compared to the attempt of a person to stand on his own shoulders. Just as the eye cannot see itself, the ego is unable to end its own existence. All that it does to bring about self-annihilation only goes to add to its own existence. It flourishes on the very efforts directed against itself. Thus, it is unable to vanish altogether through its own desperate activity, although it succeeds in transforming its own nature. The disappearance of the ego is conditioned by the melting away of the limited mind, which is its seat. Okay. Parallel between sleep and God realization. The problem of God realization is the problem of emancipating consciousness from the limitations of the mind. When the individual mind is dissolved, the whole universe relative to the mind vanishes into nothingness, and consciousness is no longer tied to anything. Consciousness is now unlimited and unlocked by anything, and serves the purpose of illumining the state of infinite reality. While immersed in the bliss of realization, the soul is completely oblivious of sights or sounds or objects in the universe. In this respect, it is like sound sleep, but there is an infinite difference that distinguishes God realization from sound sleep. He goes on, during sleep, the illusion of the universe vanishes, since all consciousness is in abeyance. But there is no conscious experience of God, since this requires the complete dissolution of the ego and the turning of full consciousness toward the ultimate reality. Occasionally, when the continuity of deep sleep is interrupted for brief intervals, one may have the experience of retaining consciousness without being conscious of anything in particular. There is consciousness, but this consciousness is not of the universe. It is consciousness of nothing. Such experiences parallel those of God realization, in which consciousness is completely freed from the illusion of the universe and manifests the infinite knowledge that was hitherto hidden by the ego. So that's the similarity between sleep and God realization. The next subtitle is difference between sleep and God realization. In sleep, the individual mind continues to exist, although it has forgotten everything, including itself, and the latent impressions in the mind create a veil between the submerged consciousness and the infinite reality. Thus, during sleep, consciousness is submerged in the shell of the individual mind, but it has not yet been able to escape from that shell. Though the soul has forgotten its separateness from God and has actually attained unity with Him, it is unconscious of this unity. In God realization, however, the mind does not merely forget itself, but has, with all its impressions, actually lost its identity. The consciousness which was hitherto associated with the individual mind is now freed and untrammeled and brought into direct contact and unity with the ultimate reality. Since there is now no veil between consciousness and the ultimate reality, consciousness is fused with the absolute and eternally abides in it as an inseparable aspect, promoting an unending state of infinite knowledge and unlimited bliss. Okay. So is everybody clear between the similarity and dissimilarity of sleep and
Jai Baba, I think that I think there is one sentence which is very important out here. Though the soul has forgotten its separateness from God and has actually attained unity with Him, it is unconscious of this unity. So here is a clear indication or proof that even though we have not, we have ego consciousness, but at least in the sleep state, the soul's consciousness or the consciousness of the soul unites with the universal consciousness, but it is unconscious of this unity. So that is why I said that the 33% 8 hours of deep sleep, we actually have that, unconscious union, right? Jai Baba.
So this statement begs a question. Okay, though the soul has forgotten its separateness from God and has actually attained unity with Him, but it is unconscious of this unity. Why? That's something we can discuss, right? Why is that?
It's a very, very important, good question you said. There is chapter which we read earlier in God and the Individual, page 20. Okay, you want to go back to that? Okay, it's page. Okay,
But
I'll go to page. No, this will give you the clear indication what you're asking the question, that why for ordinary human beings, even though we actually attain unity, start with page 19 at the last paragraph.
Yeah, before we go there, I think
in God Speaks or Discourses? Sorry.
Discourses.
In God Speaks, Evolution of Consciousness, there are few pages dedicated to about Baba gave like 7 stages of waking up from deep sleep to the totally awake state.
Right. Yes.
And this is connected with that. Yeah.
Yes, that is much more of a detailed thing. But this particular paragraph that I'm going to read, there is a word called consummate consciousness, which is not mentioned in God Speaks. So let me read this paragraph. We have seen that the possible field of consciousness is limited by the sanskaras. This limitation creates a division of the human psyche into 2 parts. One part falls within the range of consciousness, and the other part falls beyond it. The unconscious part, in its full extent, is identical with the power that is behind matter. It is referred to as God by the Orthodox religions. The ultimate reality, which is symbolically represented through such concepts, can be known fully only by bringing the unconscious into consciousness. An extension of consciousness consists in being conscious of that which was formerly a part of the unconscious. The progressive conquest of the unconscious by the conscious culminates in consummate consciousness, which is unlimited in scope and unhindered in fashion. Between this higher state of consciousness and the limited though full consciousness of average humanity, there are about 49 degrees of illumined consciousness. They mark the important stages of growing illumination. But I want to point out one thing, these words are so confusing. One is conscious, one is unconscious, there is consummate consciousness, and there is also the consciousness. So what I've done is, the unconscious part is referring to the subconscious part. Okay, that is one thing. And wherever you read unconscious into consciousness, there are 2 terms I use: conscious consciousness and unconscious consciousness, which is the subconscious consciousness. So I'm going to leave it like that, because you need to rephrase this particular paragraph to understand that whenever they say unconscious is unconscious consciousness, and when you say conscious means the conscious consciousness, because consciousness has 2 aspects. One is the subconscious aspect and one is the conscious aspect. Jai Baba.
See, one way of understanding is the conscious part we can think as God, who is conscious, super consciousness. And human being, we can think about unconscious part, even subconscious part, or what is the other term? Subconscious and I forgot the other term. That also comes under the human being. If you think that way, also it's another way of understanding. Basically, it's the sanskaras that are coming in the way to experience God. So we experience in the deep sleep state. We don't have any sanskaras. All the sanskaras are being rested. No activity. That's why we experience God in the deep sleep state. But as we are waking up is nothing but slowly one by one sanskaras starts waking up, and they create dream. And when all the sanskaras are awake, then we are conscious. Our eyelids are open and we know what's going on. That is where we wear the spectacles of mind spectacles. That's where we try to see the universe with our mind. Jai Baba.
One question to Kama. Can the stage 2B can be called consummate consciousness?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, see, this one is, let's put it, see, state 2B is technically Paramatma. Okay.
Yes.
What is being referred here, if you look at the subtitle, it says chasm between consciousness and unconsciousness. The way I have understood this particular paragraph is, we all know that there are instances of Baba sleeping and snoring. Okay. And, Babu is thinking that, Baba is deep asleep and he can move a little bit. And suddenly Baba wakes up and says like, hey, what's going on? So one of the things you learn from Baba literature is that the self-realized beings don't go to sleep, ordinary sleep, the way they are, because their consciousness is always awake. They are only resting the gross body, basically. They are always, their consciousness is awake, because that is consummate consciousness, because there are no more sanskaras. What is consummate consciousness? Consummate consciousness is the state where sanskaras are zero. You have achieved the super consciousness and I am God state. Now, what it refers out here is that for ordinary people, when they go to sleep, the subconscious, because in the English dictionary, unconscious and subconscious are given the same definition. So let's use the word subconscious, because unconscious is like a guy who's suddenly becomes unconscious, we say, but we are talking about the subconscious mind. So in sleep, for an ordinary person, the subconsciousness overlaps the conscious consciousness. Okay. Whereas for a self-realized being, the conscious consciousness overlaps the subconscious consciousness. That is why it says an extension of consciousness consists in being conscious of that which was formerly a part of the unconscious or subconscious. The progressive conquest of the unconscious, which means the progressive conquest of the subconscious consciousness by the conscious consciousness, culminates in consummate consciousness. So this is the difference between a self-realized being when they go to sleep and for an ordinary human being. The reason we are not conscious of our union with God during the sound sleep state is because the subconscious or unconscious consciousness has overlapped on the conscious consciousness. Whereas for the self-realized being, there is only one consciousness, which is super consciousness, because there is nothing like subconscious or conscious for them. It's only one super consciousness for that. Jai Baba.
Beautifully explained, Kama. So, just for a simple mind like me, what I see is this unconscious part is the human being, and the conscious part is the God. And when the unconscious part becomes one with the conscious part, that is the consummate consciousness. When one is getting God realization, Phanafila state is that's where the mixing is happening. Jai Baba.
Ravi, I just have to make one, according to this paragraph, when it says one part falls within the range of consciousness and the other part falls beyond it, which means one is the conscious consciousness and the other is a subconscious consciousness. Then it says the unconscious part, which is the subconscious, in its full extent is identical with the power that is behind matter, it is referred to as God by the Orthodox religions.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's because we don't have an understanding. What is that beyond our understanding? Our understanding is what is the conscious, what are we conscious of? And there is subconsciousness. And beyond that, there is no awareness of that the experts are calling it God.
And here it is clearly mentioned, the next line, the ultimate reality, which we know is the I am God state or the Satchitananda state, which is symbolically represented through such concepts, can be known fully only by bringing the unconscious or the subconscious into conscious consciousness. See, the word conscious and consciousness is not used. I made it up because this was for a very, very long time. This paragraph was very confusing to me. What was trying to say? So that is just my way of interpreting this paragraph. Okay, Baba.
See, this is where the whole God speaks is Baba is talking in one sentence here. The ultimate reality, which is symbolically represented through such concepts, can be known fully only by bringing the unconsciousness into consciousness. That is the whole gist of the God speaks. All whole drama of this evolution, reincarnation, and the involution part. A to B, journey from A to B, or journey from head to heart.
Yes, another definition is God realization is from unconscious divinity to conscious divinity. This is referred to in discourses somewhere. Unconscious divinity to conscious divinity. Yes.
Conscious divinity, correct. Yeah. Every time we read discourses, we find something new. Interesting.
Absolutely. I went to
144.
144, is it? Okay.
I tried to read God discourses a number of times. Only, to be honest with you, the whole discourses I read only with you guys. First time.
Okay. Good.
Now I'm understanding more.
I read the first time only last year. I'll also be honest. I tried and did not complete it like you. Anyway, let's continue.
Every time I travel to India, like a good boy, I carry discourses. I try to read. Oh my God, this is boring. This is not my standard. I used to carry it back. Yeah.
Sure. God realization is a personal attainment. By the way, you can also listen to, we had a lively discussion around this conscious consciousness and unconscious consciousness, and the perfect master and avatars sleep even in the chapter God in the individual that we read in this year. So please go back to that video. You can find it on Trello and go to that video. You will again see a lively discussion around this if people are not sure of that para. It's worth spending that time. With that, I'll continue. God realization, a personal attainment. The manifestation of infinite knowledge and unlimited bliss in consciousness is, however, strictly confined to the soul that has attained God realization. The infinite reality in the God realized soul has explicit knowledge of its own infinity. Such explicit knowledge is not experienced by the unrealized soul, which is still subject to the illusion of the universe. Thus, if God realization were not a personal attainment of the soul, the entire universe would come to an end as soon as any one soul achieved God realization. This does not happen because God realization is a personal state of consciousness belonging to the soul that has transcended the domain of the mind. Other souls continue to remain in bondage, and they can only attain realization by freeing their consciousness from the burden of the ego and the limitations of the individual mind. Hence, the attainment of God realization has direct significance only for the soul that has emerged out of the time process. Yes. So this is a important distinction, and the logic why it's personal. What was latent in infinite? Yeah, you said something, Ravi.
Yeah, how do we unburden ego? False ego. At least I am so important, right? You guys all have to respect me. I am the greatest guy. I have that feeling. I'm special, guys.
Do you?
I have that feeling. I'm special compared to all of you guys. How do I unburden that?
There are Baba has given a lot of ways of loving him and remembering him and everything else. But even if you don't do anything, Baba is going to straighten us in any way, you know. So,
Baba is going to slap with a cricket bat.
It's
not ordinary slap.
Yeah, it's just a time factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are going to sow
Jai
what we
Baba,
reap.
I think
cricket.
We are going to reap what we sow. So that principle will remain.
But Jai Baba, Ravi, Jai Baba, Ravi, the fact that you're aware of what is going on inside you, that itself is the beginning of the journey. So I think that most people are ignorant about their own, whatever attitudes, negative, positive attitudes, what you call as superiority, inferiority, equality complexes. As Baba says, we are all, unity in diversity. So I think once an individual starts recognizing what are the traits that I need to work on, that itself is the beginning of a spiritual journey by itself. So it's a good thing. I think the only thing we can do is, as Baba says, IEIP, intense effort and infinite patience. So once you become self-aware of yourself, automatically the process starts, and one day you win the lottery, Jai Baba.
I used to do Bhagavad Gita in temple from 2000 to 2013. I mean, I used to explain what is in Bhagavad Gita. There's one parent came from Chennai actually. We had the same question. And the answer what he gave me was very profound, very, very profound. It stuck me so strongly. And it's not a one-day learning and then I will learn, to control my ego the whole life. It's not. It's a continuous process. The more you give importance to the others, that should be our aim. If we give more importance more than ourselves, it depends on the situation. I think that helps us to reduce that ego. Because mind always, the ahankara, what we have, always try to project itself, right? That is the problem. We have to have that control. Lack of control of this mind's projection or ego's projection is the problem. And it goes beyond the reach. See, that is where we have to. And one more example is, who is the gentleman who used to chant 100 times Kaikobad, right? He used to chant Baba's name 1 lakh times every day. And after many, many years, Baba said, okay, from today onwards, don't chant anymore. And then he was struggling a lot. And then he was automatically chanting because for years and years, he chanted every day. That was the only job Baba gave him, to chant 1 lakh times. And suddenly Baba tells him to stop. And then Baba calls him after a couple of days. Are you chanting? And Baba, he is very honest and said, Baba, I'm not consciously chanting, but without my own knowledge, it's coming. Baba yelled at him and told him, stop chanting. I think there are two things that I understand. One is, I did not read what was the reason why Baba's asked him to stop. One is to have a mind control, and second thing is that obedience to the master. Those are the two things I collected from that Baba's order. Jai Baba.
Sure. Jai Baba. So the next subtitle is What was latent in infinite becomes manifest. After the attainment of God realization, the soul discovers that it has always been the infinite reality that it now knows itself to be, and that it's regarding itself as finite during the period of evolution and spiritual advancement was in fact an illusion. The soul also finds out that the infinite knowledge and bliss it now enjoys have also been latent in the infinite reality from the very beginning of time, and that they merely became manifest at the moment of realization. Thus, the God realized person does not actually become something different from what he was before realization. He remains what he was, and the only difference realization makes in him is that previously he did not know consciously his own true nature, and now he knows it. He knows that he has never been anything other than what he now knows himself to be, and that all he has been through was but the process of finding his self. Right? The whole process of attaining God realization, again, the subtitle is Two Types of Advantages. The whole process of attaining God realization is just a game in which the beginning and the end are identical. The attainment of realization is nevertheless a distinct gain for the soul. In general, there are two types of advantages. One consists in getting what one did not previously possess. The other in realizing fully what one really is. God realization is of the second type. However, this creates an infinite difference between the soul that has attained God realization and the soul that has not. Though the God realized soul does not possess anything new, its explicit knowledge of all that it really is, has been, and will ever be, makes God realization all important. The soul that is not God realized experiences itself as being finite and is constantly troubled by the opposites of fleeting joys and sorrows. But the soul that has realization is lifted out of them and experiences the infinite knowledge and the unlimited bliss of being God conscious. Value of God realization. In God realization, the soul drops its separate consciousness and transcends duality in the abiding knowledge of its identity with the infinite reality. The shackles of limited individuality are broken. The world of shadows is at an end. The curtain of illusion is forever drawn. The feverishness and the agonizing distress of the pursuits of limited consciousness are replaced by the tranquility and bliss of truth consciousness. The restlessness and fury of temporal existence are swallowed up in the peace and stillness of eternity.
Jai Baba, I want to just make a comment here that in the prior paragraph, the second last paragraph with the subtitle Two Types of Advantages, I think the first few lines are very, very important. Let me repeat that. The whole process of attaining God realization is just a game. So here we are looking at a process. And then it says it's just a game. in which the beginning and the end are identical. In fact, today morning when I was talking to Karthik before our session, we were talking about the circle. Exactly, you start from 0 degrees, you go to 90, 180, 270, and 360 degrees. So it's very interesting that almost like there is a word for it, I forget, that we were discussing this, and today we are now reading this, where I was looking at 0 degrees as the Paratpar Parabrahma state and the state to be, where God asks, "Who am I?" through the drop souls. And it goes through evolution, reincarnation, which you can look at it as going through the 90 degrees, then 180. Maybe we can say from 0 degrees to 180 degrees is going through all the evolution up till the human kingdom. And then from 180 to 270 can be the reincarnation state. And from the reincarnation, 270 degrees to 360 is the involution state. And that is why here another point is, which is the beginning and the end are identical. The attainment of realization is nevertheless a distinct gain for the soul. In general, there are two types of advantages. One consists in getting what one did not previously possess, the other in realizing fully what one really is. God realization is the second type. So it's a very tongue twisting statement out here. The first one says what one consists in getting what one did not previously possess. Actually, it's not true. We are all God realized, except that we have not realized it fully. And that is why it says the second type is the God realization, the other in realizing fully what one really is. So we are all one drop soul. We are the same self, but we are not awakened to that fact. So this was very interesting to me, Jai Baba.
Yeah, that's a very complicated classification that he says there. But I think it is to say, to define progress, typically you get something. And one type, I mean, the two types of making progress is what I took away from it. But I totally related to the 0 to 360 when I was reading this beginning and end, what we spoke in the morning, right? Yeah.
Karthik, I have an observation. I mean, of course, correlating it to the circle and degrees, but that analogy, of course, is very nice to understand. But we can't quantify. Is it? I mean, it's difficult to quantify. The degrees, 0 to 90, or I mean, of course, we can assume something.
It's just a visualization or just a approximation. It's not, but
an analogy.
Analogy of 0 and 360 is something that we both liked and related to.
Yes.
Baba already gave this analogy, similar analogy, in one of the diagram, right? In God Speaks, from the God, when you are counterclockwise come evolution, and at 6 o'clock position, human being reincarnation, and whole from 180 degrees to 360, the involution process.
Can you give the chart number, please?
The classic big diagram, the man praying at the human level stage, and then sixth plane, there is one eye seeing the God. In the God Speaks.
Yeah, if you can.
The
chart number.
I think chapter 9, I think, if I remember right. 10 states of God.
You are speaking of the color diagram.
Yeah, this one. That's it.
Thanks, Suna.
This is 12 o'clock, evolution. And then here is 180 degrees, we can say. But Baba put the whole reincarnation at 6 o'clock position. And then involution starts counterclockwise.
Yes.
49 stages from human level to the God states, or 49 degrees
of illumination. Awesome.
Many people ask, a few of us stating that, what do you get out of studying spirituality? So how do we answer with the background of what we read now? That paragraph which was repeated also.
Spirituality is to know who you are, to know who you really are. We think we are human beings, we think, but we need to know really that we have infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss. To know that, we need to be aware. For that, spiritual knowledge helps in a simple way.
That is agreed, but materially, we don't get anything.
We can make money.
That's what is brought out in that paragraph, right? So
all you have to wear is saffron robes and
so that's
grow
why
your
the
daddy.
Realization and the meaning of realization, we need to keep always thinking on that. So what is actually realization? There is already there something which we are understanding anew for the second time, or third time, or fourth time, better every time. And ultimately we grasp that totally. That is the process of realization. So there is nothing new that you are going to get out of it, but you are uncovering all bad things, or say the muck over it, and then you can see the clarity better every time. So it is very difficult for one who is totally materially bound to accept this, because he feels we don't get anything out of it. That is the problem. So that is
Doc Mama, Doc Mama, what I want to say is that what you're saying is, what is the spirituality business? I think it can be looked at different angles. The way I look at it is that once you have reached the state of human evolution, where we talk about full and complete consciousness, we define ourselves as human beings, not human becomings, which we apparently are. We are trying to become God realized, which I think was very clear in this particular thing, which said one consists in getting what one did not previously possess. That's not. You're already God, you're a human being. So I think the way I look at it in a humorous sense is we are here to amuse ourselves. Now we went through evolution, the work is done. So you have to be like King Janaka. Enjoy the material, goods of life, but be detached. Nothing wrong in having a penthouse or having a BMW. You just need to be detached from it and amuse yourself, and that is where I think the other chapter called Lover and the Beloved, From Everything and Nothing, clearly summarizes that God himself has positioned himself through drop souls like us. We are it. We are just going through this amusement stage, basically. Jai Baba.
Yeah.
I thought a little bit differently. Yeah, I'm good, Mamaji. Thank you.
Quarantine.
Yes, it's a quarantine. Another 4 days to go.
That's why it's called as a game. That's why it's called as a divine game, So let's play the game,
Yes.
If we all realize we are all in quarantine until we wear out all our sanskaras.
No, but some are hum tum ek kamre mein band ho. Okay.
Oh, this is that song manifested completely. हो जाए की जगह चाबी ले जाए. They have taken our keys. I was just thinking of answer to Mamaji's question. What do we gain materially? Actually, if you look at it, the whole explanation is that this material world only gives you suffering. Real happiness or real bliss is on spiritual path. But it's the knowledge, that you need to have that is the path to get real happiness or real infinite bliss or whatever. But unless we have that knowledge, we won't go on that path. So it's quite difficult to explain, I understand. But The material world only gives you suffering in the end. Whatever you have, whether you have plain blue house, big house, small house, in the end it leads to suffering. How do we detach ourselves from that suffering? That is the game. I mean, if we have explained to somebody, just my 2 cents worth.
Yes, agreed. I was just alluding to the fact that, say, we in society we come across many people and we have to interact with so many different shades of, say, characters.
True.
When we are put in a situation where they ask you, what is that you are gaining out of
gaining out? Yeah.
So it's very difficult to tell a totally materialistic person. So he is always tuned to some gain out of material gain out of it.
Material gain out of it, yeah.
Time
Baba does give us comforts at times to pull us back. Those candies are all material gains in different forms.
Yes.
But that's again to pull us back on the path.
Jai Baba, in a clinical sense, there is nothing like real suffering. It is what you call as the word apparent suffering. And this suffering which we talk about, which Buddha himself has said, suffering is the universal truth. The three causes of suffering is craving, aversion, and ignorance. Because of ignorance, we have craving and aversion, which is part of the duality. And third postulate is said we are all walking Buddhas. Before me, thousands of Buddhas, after us, thousands of Buddhas. So I think the kind of suffering which we are experiencing is because of the false identification with the body. My family, my body, the physical body, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where Baba said renunciation of desires is the key to transcend suffering, the so-called suffering. That is because of ignorance, Actually, happiness and suffering are basically two sides of the same coin. We have to go through so-called apparent suffering to discover the real I self, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Isn't there a famous saying, pain is inevitable, but the suffering is a choice?
Yeah. I was reading the Glow magazine, the latest one, the earlier lectures of Baba in 30s. And there I got a very beautiful simile that Baba gave. Is like swine who loves to eat the filth. And if you give swine something which is more nutritious or tasty or anything, he doesn't like it actually. So in a sense that we all are typically in the same kind of situation, that we love the filth around us actually, and the real thing is elusive. And with Baba's grace, we have a glimpse of it, but we need to, progress in that path to taste the real tasty food actually that is there in store for us. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Yeah.
Indeed. So we're well out of time, but we had a great discussion, and I think we read the chapter on God realization. Not sure how many of us made it, but we'll keep the journey and connect up tomorrow morning, right? So have a great Saturday, and let's catch up tomorrow morning.
I have one final parting question to Kama. In all the places when it is referred to as God realization, it is linked to infinite knowledge and infinite bliss. What happened to power?
Yeah, I noticed that. Good point. I noticed that power was missing.
I believe that, when God speaks also, it mentions that of all the three, Sachitananda, infinite knowledge is what it's, then comes infinite power and infinite bliss. So I think the infinite power can be looked upon as when you are one of the 56 God realized beings and you're on planet Earth, and especially when you're a Sadguru, you will use your power to kind of, do whatever changes that are necessary to be made. So that is how I look at it, from that point of view, how power can be interpreted. Yeah, Baba.
Can it be another aspect? Can it be that those who are in involution at the fourth plane, they get the full power? The rest of the things they get as they go move along.
Actually, from what I understand from God Speaks, the power that you have in the fourth plane is still a subset of the infinite power in the Satchitananda state.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Still limited power.
Okay.
Jai Baba,
Thank you.
Avatar Meher
Jai
Baba.
Baba, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba,
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Vipulji. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.